We are. All right. Hello and welcome everybody to today's Bodacity show. Oh, I forgot to check how to pronounce your name, which was a really big name to try and remember how to pronounce. Welcome today, Ahuva.
Exactly.
Is that correct? Okay. Magda Hershkop. Is
Oh
that
my
right?
God, look at you go.
Okay, there we go. Good guesses all around. By the way, if you have a podcast, remember to ask your guests how to say their name before you get on air. All right, so I am your hostess with the mostest, Jeanette Anderson, and today we're going to be talking about the 3 Ps of burnout, and especially the working mom hustle culture, which is going to be really interesting for those of you who are moms, thinking about being moms, or are really happy you aren't moms because you have to worry about the working hustle culture. So welcome. I'm so glad you're here, Ahuva.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. And you're in Toronto, right? Toronto, Canada.
I am, yeah.
Currently in Vancouver, but as you all know, I have a mobile lifestyle, so it could be anywhere at any time. In fact, later this week, I'll be back in Calgary. So speaking of hustling from here to there to everywhere, so tell us a little, I'm going to tell you the official info about Ahuva, and then we'll get the juicy, real deep tidbits about her. And then we're going to rock and roll on our topic of the working mom hustle culture and the 3 Ps of burnout. So Ahuva Hershkop is a Toronto-based anti-diet dietitian, love that, and burnout coach for professional women in her one-to-one group coaching and corporate partnerships. She supports professional women and the organizations that they support in stepping out of the working mom hustle culture that leads so many women to burnout, so that they can start enjoying their days again and making their goals a reality without losing themselves or compromising on their professional aspirations in the process. Both and. As the working mother who supports professional women, Ahuva is well-versed in the specific and unique challenges professional women experience in advancing their careers while navigating their personal responsibilities, specifically in a post-pandemic virtual world. She supports clients one-to-one and in her group programs, the Unapologetic Living Code. Let me try that again, the Unapologetic Living Code, to step out of the perfectionism, people-pleasing, and socialization that holds women back so that they can create a life they enjoy living without compromising on their personal or professional goals. Really important work, and I'm so glad that you're doing that, especially for moms. So welcome. Happy to have you here.
I'm happy to be here.
So tell us a little bit about you that we wouldn't guess from listening to that bio or going to your website or something. What's something that would surprise people?
It's funny, I feel like I put it all out there. Like, especially when you're on social media, when you're on Facebook, I'm like, I don't even know what surprised people. But didn't say in there that I have 3 kids who are 6 and under, one of whom who is homesick today, so is supposed to not come in the room. The fact I always go with when people are like, what's one surprising thing to you? I'm like, I was tongue-tied until I was 28. Does that count?
Really? Yeah, really.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. What changed at 28?
I had a release.
You had a
I had a tongue tie release. I was in a profession of speaking, and it got very tiring to speak. So I had it taken care of.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant figuratively tongue-tied, like shot, but no, you're literally tongue-tied. Okay. There you go. That's very interesting. So it made it easier to speak and be seen and heard. And
as somebody who just basically doesn't stop talking, that was very important for me.
Awesome. All right. So tell us a little bit about why you started in the work that you're doing, or what's your why? Why do you do what you do?
I do what I do for it was kind of an interesting evolution in how I ended up here. As I said, I'm an anti-diet dietitian, was largely working with a pediatric based practice. So on raising intuitive eaters, on, building healthy food practices, and working with a lot of women, right? And what sort of evolved for me was, a lot of my practice ended up being less focused on specific picky eating strategies and more a lot on women coming to me being like, I feel like I'm failing at everything. So help me, like, am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? I feel like I'm doing it all wrong. I'm doing all the things, but I don't know. And noticing how many other places in their lives they were showing up with that question, right? They're like, am I doing this whole thing right? while at the same time building a business, being like, am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? Everybody else is better than me. I don't know. I'm so insecure. Oh, maybe I should ask a friend, but I'm embarrassed to ask that question, right? All of those ways that I was showing up in there as well. I started building my nutrition business really in the beginning of 2020. And, I found out that I was pregnant with my third child 2 days after COVID lockdowns started, and I was home with 3-year-old twins. And I was like, this is fine. We're going to hustle through. I'm going to build anyway. I can do it. Rah, 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 rah. And so many of my clients also were like, we're just trying to push and we're just trying to push, and we feel like we have nothing left. And it took me going back to work 6 days after having my son to not lose momentum in my nutrition business, to understand how quickly I was spiraling towards burnout, and was seeing it in everybody else, like so many of the other professional moms that I was working with. And suddenly something clicked, like the why that I got into this is I was like, this can't just be like, it was one thing when I thought it's just me, but it can't just be, it's just me for everyone I know. Right? Like there has to be something more at play here. And so really the work that I do is supporting professional women and understanding what all of those factors are, right? If we take away like, it just is what it is, and it's just your fault if you're burning out, then actually, how did all of us end up here? Right? Because before we start solving a problem, we actually have to understand what the problem is. And so we really do that work together inside my container so that we can then start actually planning to shift.
Yes, absolutely. And like many people, we often, especially coaches, come to that through going through the same process ourselves and not wanting other people to suffer the same kind of challenges we did, and getting through to the other side, having some insights to be able to pass along. So tell me a little bit about how you would define burnout. What does burnout actually mean? Because it's one of those words that gets used a lot, but what does it actually mean?
Yeah. So I can sort of tell you, a little bit about how I know that it shows up for a lot of my clients, because I think that there's two parts of why it can be so hard for people to understand what it means. And number one is because so many of the feelings and behaviors of burnout are things that we've just sort of accepted in hustle culture. We're like, no, that's just part of life. Right. And so we sort of normalize them to the point that it's kind of hard to understand that it's a problem worth solving when, we've sort of like stepped into this is just part of life. But, people who are having like difficulties relaxing, right? There's that feeling of like guilt no matter what you're doing. And you never sort of feel like you're getting ahead, even though there's a million things on your to-do list. I always ask people, like, when was the last time you really felt like you could relax? Not like laid on the couch and watched a movie, but like laid on the couch and watched a movie and didn't have your mind racing and feel guilty about it. Like not being able to fall asleep without I call them the credit rolls, like that to-do list for tomorrow already going through your mind, waking up with that same credit roll, going through. And really, it's a little bit of starting to feel that demotivation, right? If you're someone who's a high achiever, if you're someone who's used to like being able to show up 110%, it's kind of that like, I'm still showing up 110% and I'm kind of experiencing like 70% output, right? Like I'm not doing as much. I'm not able to do as much. Everything feels harder. Everything takes longer, that kind of feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially the feels harder, and the response is usually just push harder.
Exactly.
So talk about what you mean about the hustle culture, especially the working mom's hustle culture.
So the way that I describe the working mom hustle culture is, and I think that this is true for most people who are socialized as women, because, the working mom hustle culture is something that tells us that we have to give 1,000% at work and 1,000% at home without the support or time to do that. And then puts the blame back on the individual when they burn out. Right. And I think that so many women, people socialized as women, whether you are actually like mother to a child, or you're just someone who's in a caregiving role, right? Which most women find themselves in, whether it's like taking care of parents, taking care of nieces and nephews, like anything like that. It really is how we're socialized to show up. Like do for other people is very much a strong sense. And so a lot of women who keep themselves stuck in there, what they're really stuck with is holding being busy as a value, right? Like, how much are you doing for other people? How much are you showing up for other people? You have 20 things on your to-do list. Well, I have 25. So like, you must not even be tired, right? It's this sort of like measuring against how
Mhm.
much we have to do, that keeps women just so busy, but not necessarily moving forward to the places that they actually want to go. And then there's this very strong focus on, there's one right way.
Mhm.
And if you can just do the right way, all of your happiness is on the other side of that right way,
Mhm.
right? And if you can't figure out how to do that, that's a you problem, not like sort of a system problem, right? And this is really where I see a lot of like the overlap in my work as a dietitian and as a coach is, I see diet culture as hustle culture also, right?
Mhm.
Like with every diet, there's just one right diet. Everyone should do it. All of your happiness is on the other side. And if you can't stick to it, that's a you problem,
Mhm.
right? And so many of us stay stuck in this hustle culture where we're perpetually waiting for that thing that's on the other side. And we're not enjoying our lives. We're not taking time for ourselves. We're not sort of actually in our lives. We're kind of always waiting for them to start.
Exactly. And especially even as entrepreneurs, I think whether you're an employee, an entrepreneur, stay-at-home mom, we're all prone to that. There's more. There's more I
Yeah,
should be doing. There's more I should be giving. There's more I should be in order.
100%.
And,
Yeah.
and it shows up differently for all three of them, but it shows up in similar kinds of burnout. So talk about what does burnout present as? Like, how do people know if they're burnt out?
It's a great question because, like, as I said, again, like a lot of these sort of things, right? Like the feeling of not being able to stop, of like you have your to-do list and it just keeps growing somehow, but like you're never really getting ahead of it. All of those kind of things are what we've sort of built into the normal, right?
Mhm.
Everyone is supposed to be hustling all the time. And so burnout really like is sometimes almost a hard thing for people to spot in themselves, right? And so instead of trying to sort of like check things like, oh yeah, I have this symptom and I have that symptom and this symptom, it's really looking more at the life, like, throughout your day to day, how much of yourself do you see in there,
So
right?
speak more about
Versus, yeah,
what do you mean by that?
like when you look at sort of like the goals that you're working towards, right? I always encourage people before they start working with me, and we do this together during our time working together, is just when you're looking at your time spent throughout the day, right? Starting to ask questions of like, why, right? When you're like, I have to do something like this. I have to go to the family dinner tonight, or I have to, I don't know if you're an entrepreneur, like get a new client by Monday, right? Like, why? Why are all of those things important to you, right? Because very often we start seeing things that are important to us, like, no, it's just super important to me that I do that. And we really get down to the nitty gritty. It was important to somebody else, and you sort of took it on for yourself.
Mhm.
Right? I have to go to family dinner because it's super important to me to do that. And I say this as like someone who's, if their mom was watching, like it is important for me personally to do that. I do enjoy family dinners, but some people, why really? Because there's going to be conflict if I don't,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? And so starting to really see where some of these choices that we're making, are they really moving us into the direction that we actually want to be in?
Mhm. Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
and like if you imagined, what I always want people who have long-term goals to imagine is, if you stayed in your life right now, would you still be happy?
Mhm.
Right. And so, sometimes people think that like they can't be happy until they're satisfied with whatever the goal is. Right. And I'm an entrepreneur, you're an entrepreneur, like whether you're climbing a corporate ladder, whatever it is, there's a way to have goals.
Mhm.
And there is a way to also say, like, but am I having fun in my life right now?
Yeah.
Right? Am I enjoying myself right now? And if the answer is no, that's where we want to start looking at some of the ways, like, and some of the things that are burning you out.
Yeah. So being curious about, am I living the life that I want? And if not, whose voice is telling me what I should be doing and have to be doing? And really listening
Exactly.
to the shoulds and the have tos, because those are big
Yeah.
clues that chances are it's not a free choice if it's coming from a
Yeah.
should do. So tell us, what are the three P's of burnout?
And three P's of burnout are perfectionism, people pleasing, and pressure. And pressure typically comes from society, family, and there's pressure that we put on ourselves to show up a certain way. And a lot of, women end up stuck making all of their decisions from these three Ps because of skills that were never really taught, right? So perfectionism, a lot of times, and the way that I talk about it comes from a fear of failure, because most women are never taught how to properly fail, right? And it almost becomes an outfit of armor. Like, if you don't know how to fail, the easiest way to prevent yourself from having to deal with that is just be perfect all the time, right? People pleasing, we are very much, so again, as I said, like, socialized to show up for everybody else and to prioritize everybody else's needs above our own. And I think that we sort of almost pushed it to the point where it's not only everybody else's needs that come before most, before what most women are willing to put their needs, it's everyone's needs, everyone's wants, everyone's like greatest ever desire, like all of those were like, that's fine, I won't even have coffee in the morning until I've done that for you, right? And then there's the pressure, there's the real socialization that happens, there's the real family expectations that happen, there's breaking sort of generational patterns of how professional women or women have been showing up, right? And there's understanding that so much of the models that we see are based on previous generations, people who are doing things differently than us. And it takes intentional work to then decide something different.
A lot of intentional work. So speaking of that, what are some of when people recognize themselves or think that they're burnt out or might be coming towards burnout, which probably means they already are. What are some of the things?
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. If you suspect, you probably are.
Exactly.
What are some of the practical things that people can and should do to reverse that, or to mitigate it, or slow it down, or eliminate it? What can we do?
Yeah. So I think that number one is, don't let the things that are burning you out also be the way that you start trying to address them. Meaning, sometimes people hear me speak, sometimes people hear, or start a self-development sort of thing, whether again, like that's hearing about burnout or whether that is hearing about anything else you want to work on. And they're like, that's great, I'm going to master this in an hour. I see the problem now. It's so clear. That's like the same perfectionism that is burning you out is the same perfectionism that is going to, continue burning you out if that's the way that you address it. And so, whether again, like it's working with someone like me or working with another coach who can actually show you some of the practical ways, that can be incredibly helpful. But one way, if you're not necessarily starting with someone, is just using what I call my what, why, what strategy.
Why, what, why?
What, why, what?
What, why, what? Okay.
And that's really doing it, a very like more in-depth look at what I was saying before, right? Starting with what, like, what are the things that you're doing, right? You don't need to like keep an entire log for a week, but look at a day, look at just a couple of days even, and just start keeping track of what the things are you're doing, because sometimes we don't even remember what it is that we're doing. And then start getting really used to asking the question, why? Like, why am I doing that? Right. And the second piece is, when you've answered the question, why, I always encourage people to then say, okay, if there was a more true answer, what would that be? Right. And going from, my nutrition and picky eating days, sometimes, the example that I give is talking to moms who are like, why do I make 7 meals for my kids? Because I just want them to eat something, like, because they need to eat. Right. And when I would say, okay, what's a more true version of that? A lot of the times when we delve deep enough, it's because I'm so insecure as a parent today. And at least if my child eats, then I can feel good for 5 minutes. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And that's a very different why than the original why. And so in order to shift anything that we're doing, we have to be able to understand the motivation that we have and why we're actually doing what we're doing. And if you're having trouble doing that, the second question that I encourage people to use is what, which is just, okay, well, what am I getting out of it? Right? We get something out of everything, even if what we get is confirmation that we're the world's worst person. Right? Yep. And so, if you're staying up late every day and you can't figure out why you can't get to bed at 10 o'clock, even though you really want to get to bed at 10 o'clock, what are you getting out of staying up late? Right? And that's a very simple example, but we get something out of everything. And sometimes we jump straight to, and believe me, like high achiever, type A, all the things over here. So I totally get the wanting to jump the gun to, okay, let's move into action and figure this out. But sometimes we start trying to change or starting to solve problems that we haven't fully understood, right?
Mhm.
And so starting to get used to asking that why, asking that what, like, what am I getting out of this to really, really in depth understand, the issue that we're trying to address,
Mhm.
before we can then jump into, okay, well, how would I like to solve that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people like to do the bypass and go right to throwing solutions at things because of that hustle training of do,
Yeah,
do, right? Rather than being with what is. And I think that's a
yeah,
brilliant approach. So I just want to recap it because I want people to write this down. It is a real brilliant approach to getting clarity about why something is not working and how can we kind of drill down on it. So really get clear on what's going on, what's the situation, and then why is that happening. So not from a blaming point of view, but from a curiosity of what's driving this, what's causing it, and then drilling down and what's behind that, what's a deeper why, what's a deeper telling more of the truth of that, and maybe drilling down again and again until you get to a bottom line of what's really motivating that, which is almost always to look good or avoid looking bad, to be loved, to be
yeah,
good enough in some way. And then the third what is what I how I paraphrase it is, what is the need that's trying to be met. So
yeah,
what is really going on? What is this trying to accomplish? And how do you get that need met in a more direct, clean, effective way rather than kind of the hooky roundabout way?
yeah,
So those three steps are a really good step for getting clarity about where you're really at, what's really motivating you, and how do you start to solve it in a real effective way at the root, not at the effect, not at the cause,
yeah.
not the effect. So if you haven't written that down, write it down because it's a really great process for stepping through any issue, but especially these kinds of have to's and shoulds and drive and push, because it is burning out women. Women are
Yeah.
having increasing heart incidences and heart attacks and so forth at an alarmingly increasing rate, and other issues. And a lot of it is this push, push, push drive. So you mentioned some of the things for identifying what some of the issues are. What's some advice that you give women who are those perfectionist type A drivers? Because for many of us, that's just how I am, and that's just how it is, and that's how it has to be in order to keep up, in order
Yeah.
to get anywhere.
And I think that that's a real fear, right? That's something that so many women, number one, I know stops more women from working with me, like full disclosure. And second of all, is one of the biggest conversations that I had is, okay, but if I'm choosing between hustle, like hustling and getting it all done, or not feeling like I'm hustling, but also not getting it all done, um, I'm going to choose getting it all done, right? Because a lot of the women that I work with, like, they want to do all the things.
Yeah.
And I think that really a lot of the way that we've been speaking to people until now has been like, so just relax your standards or just leave your job. Like just and it's not that it's not okay for people to make those choices, but also for people who are like, I do want to do all the things. I just don't want to burn out. Um, is like number one, knowing that that's okay. You can still want to do all of the things. And when we start clarifying the why, like again, going back to knowing why you're doing anything, it allows for so much more flexibility when you're planning doing those things. And what I mean by that is, I'm a runner, I enjoy running, right? When I get clear on why I enjoy running, it helps my body feel good. It allows me time to like clear my mind, all of those things, right? If I just decide I'm a runner and this is what it is, I've had a twin pregnancy where it was high risk and I wasn't allowed to do very much. Was pregnant during COVID, right? Like there's lots of different times where running wasn't available to me. And because I know my why, I could go for walks,
Mhm.
right? I could do something else. I could do something that was on a different scale. I could do something that, that still allowed me to do those things. And so when people are starting to feel confused about, okay, so how do I do all of the things? Getting clear on the why you're doing it starts actually just like allowing for a little bit more sway, right? In how we're doing all of these things,
Right.
right? If it's why do I cook dinner every single night so that our whole family can can, eat together around the table. Well, like we can do that with takeout too,
Mhm.
right? And again, I don't mean that we have to relax every single standard. If you want to cook at home, we can't figure out a way to do that. But it allows for so much more creative thinking to come in to just, okay, how can I still make this possible then if I don't need to do it exactly how I've always said that I was going to do it?
Exactly. Well, I hear a couple of really smart things in there, Ahuva, about both really examining the practicality of it and with the understanding the why, getting that need met some other way,
Mhm.
right? Doesn't mean that you abandon the need or the desire or the wish. It just means that you figure out alternative ways to get the need met, which is
Yeah.
really getting clear on what's the underlying touchstone, what's really important, not the process, not the mechanics of it. But the other thing that I really appreciate about checking into the why is we get to stop and ask, is this mine? Is this my belief? Is this my, belief that this matters to me, or is this someone else's voice in my head? And so do I have to carry on with this in this way? Because it might be that it's not my why. It's not
Yeah.
that matters to me.
And that's
And
actually one of the practices that we do inside every single one of my coaching containers is clarifying whose voice you're hearing in different situations, right? And for a lot of professional women, it's very complicated because, if you're working at, like a law firm, you might be hearing like the white male 70-year-old managing partner's voice of telling you how you're supposed to live your life. And then when you get home, you might have in your head, your mother who was a homemaker and who spent all day making fresh bread for her kids, right? And a lot of these voices are sort of like banging up against each other in your head and completely contradictory. And
yeah,
so when we can clarify all of those whose voices, we can then actually unpack, okay, number one, which one of those voices like do I want to keep, if any, and which one is mine,
yeah.
right? Like what do I actually think about all of these situations?
Exactly. It's such important work. And it's really interesting because what I'm really hearing is the key to slowing down on the doing, or eliminating or finding different ways to approach it is really being present with who are we being.
Yeah.
What are our beliefs, what are our intentions, who do we want to be in the world, how do we want to show up? And when we're clearer on that, then the doing comes out of that versus from some kind of external pressure or source. We could talk for a long time about each of the 3 Ps, about being a perfectionist or a people pleaser, or the pressures that women and especially working moms are under. But tell us a little bit about how people can work with you, how they can find out more about you, and you have a gift for everyone. So tell us about that.
I do. So if you want to know more about some of my offerings, I run a 12-week coaching program for overstretched professional women. And we do a lot of this work together so that we can go from feeling completely overstretched and overwhelmed to actually building a life that you get to enjoy. I have both group and one-to-one options for that inside the Unapologetic Living Code. And yes, I'm going to give all of you my complete guide to cutting your to-do list in half without compromising on the things you're actually doing. And that is going to be found at the unapologeticlivingcode.com/guide. And I believe that'll be in the show notes.
Yep, it will be absolutely. It's underneath our video here. So the unapologeticlivingcode.com, and then it's /guide-1. So it's the one strategy professionally women need to get back in hours back in their week. So I appreciate you so much in terms of having this conversation and being a real stand for women to take care of ourselves, not at a theoretical level, not at a, shoulding on ourselves. I should do more self-care because, like you said, doing more of the same thing doesn't really solve the problem.
Yeah.
And really providing some practical ways to look at it and say, okay, whose voice is it? And is it what you believe? And is it what you want? And how else can you get that need met? Like just really practically looking at it, which is very hard for people to do for themselves. That's why it's very helpful to have a coach or someone who can help you pull that perspective away because it's so ingrained. Like you said, we've been, culturally trained, societally trained. It's even more prevalent in some cultures and some religions. So it's really insidious.
Yeah.
and kind of built in at many, many levels that we are not even aware of, that take away that freedom, take away our choice of who we want to be and how we want to show up. And, you know, moms in particular have a very important job in terms of bringing new good human beings into the world, or co-doing that in hopefully. So it's really important that they put on their oxygen mask first. And we say it over and over and over, and yet women are still dying of heart attack at an alarmingly increasing rate. So it really is time for us to actually get that the whole hustle culture doesn't work.
Yeah.
And never really did. Not for men, not for us, not for women trying to be men, not for anybody. It just doesn't work. It just creates a lot of stress and pain and illness and so forth. So,
Yeah.
all right. So what's one last thing you'd like to leave everyone with? What's one thought you'd like them to take away?
One last thought that I always, I get asked this question often is just there is no right way to do things. Like we need to just break up what, whether again, like whether you choose to do this work or choose to do it on your own or choose to work with anyone, like there's no right way to do things. We're all just figuring it out and you can just figure out the way that's best for you.
I love it. Permission for being who you are and doing life your way. So important, a big part of this whole conversation. Thank you so much for being here today, Ahuva, especially when you've got a little sick one at home and you're trying to juggle all those balls like many women do, professional women who are working and parents and so forth. And for the real permission and stand you are for women to figure it out and do it their way.
Thank you for having me.
Have a wonderful and bodacious week, and we will see you soon. Bye for now.